They sent me an invitation, not a welcome. The envelope was heavy, unnecessarily so. Cream-colored, thick with embossing like something that expected to be opened reverently. But the moment I saw the return address Diana Quinn scrawled in that familiar looping script, I knew what it was. And I knew it wasn't meant for me. Not truly. For a long minute, I let it sit untouched on the kitchen counter beside the untouched cup of black coffee already going cold. Outside New York was steeped in late November gray, the kind of wind-swept chill that crept through window frames and bones alike. I lived high above the noise now in a space that was mine clean and sharp and silent. My father used to say, "Failures don't belong at the table." His voice still echoed years after he'd said it, and now they wanted me back for Thanksgiving. The irony settled in like smoke. 5 years. That's how long it had been since the night my name was erased from the brass plaque outside Quinn and Sons. Since I'd stood on the stone steps of the family estate in Napa, listening to my father refuse to meet my eyes. Emma had stood beside him, polished and smug in her law school blazer. Diana had just smiled thinly, fingers wrapped around a wine glass like a scepter. That night, everything that bore my name was taken from me. My stake. My place. My father's voice sharp and final. "You're reckless. Unfit. You're done." And I had walked away, not even bothering to slam the door. The letter felt heavier now. I ran my thumb under the seal, broke it clean. Inside was parchment, not paper. Handwritten. Diana's cursive flowed like she was still narrating our lives from behind a veil of Chardonnay and curated intentions. "We'd love to have you join us. Thanksgiving dinner. The family misses you." I barked out a laugh, dry, involuntary. Missed me? I stared at the note, then folded it once, twice, slowly. My hands moved with purpose, almost detached. I lit a match and held the edge of the envelope over the sink. The fire caught quickly, curling black until only ash fluttered into the drain. Then I picked up my phone. I didn't need to ask myself why. That answer had lived in my bones for half a decade. It was the same answer that got me up every morning to build something from nothing, brick by silent brick. They had shut the door on me. I had learned to build a house without one. I opened the Delta app, booked a seat one-way first class. Napa Valley. Thanksgiving Day arrival. My reflection stared back at me from the screen, older, now sharper, around the eyes. They hadn't seen this version of me. I packed lightly. I wouldn't need much. A tailored coat. Shoes that didn't speak louder than my presence. A watch. Sleek, handcrafted, rare. One of two. The second was already waiting in a velvet box. I sat down with my coffee now, bitter, cold, perfect. Across the room, my suitcase waited beside the door, already zipped. The apartment fell into its usual hush, but something in the air felt shifted, braced. They think they're calling me home. I'm returning to close a chapter. Let's see if they even recognize me. My career died. They buried me without a eulogy. I remember the weight of the mahogany door as I pushed it open, the kind that creaked with expectation, heavy with generational pride. Robert Quinn's office smelled of old leather and clock oil, as though time itself had seeped into the floorboards and refused to leave. The grandfather clock ticked behind his desk like a metronome of judgment. I was 27. Still sharp at the edges, idealistic. Too bold for my own bloodline. The folder in my hand was crisp, its tabs color-coded, corners perfect. I had worked on the pitch for weeks. Digital expansion, influencer partnerships, limited edition drops marketed to collectors under 35. A path to bring Quinn and Sons out of the realm of heirlooms and into relevance. He didn't even look up as I walked in. "Sit," he said. Not hello, not Caleb. Just sit. I laid the folder in front of him, careful not to let my hand shake. This is the rollout plan, starting with the March campaign. Targeted demographics, pre-launch metrics. We've already had preliminary interest from 2 investment groups. His fingers hovered over the cover. He didn't open it. You want to turn a legacy into a hashtag. His voice was low disdain curling every syllable. My name is not for sale. It's not about selling your name. It's about preserving it. Relevance is preservation now, Dad. He stood slowly. His hands, once delicate enough to adjust the hairspring on a tourbillon, clenched into fists at his sides. You don't preserve a cathedral by blasting it into a nightclub. You light a candle and leave it the hell alone. I wanted to scream, wanted to shake him, remind him that the world didn't revere craft unless it could scroll past it. Emma was already there, silent near the window. She hadn't spoken yet, just watched. Always watching. I tried again. If we don't evolve, we'll become a relic, a footnote in a history book no one reads. That's when he shouted, "My legacy is not for sale." The silence afterward was suffocating. He picked up the folder and tore it once right down the spine. The sound felt louder than his words. Pieces of my work fluttered like dying moths to the carpet. Emma moved then, just a step forward. Dad, maybe Caleb needs some time away. To think. It wasn't a suggestion. It was the kill shot. Robert turned back to me. Hand over your keys. Effective immediately. You're relieved. My mouth was dry. You're serious. More than I've ever been. Diana entered just as the sentence was dying in the air. She wore burgundy. Her lips matched. It's for the best, sweetheart, she said. You've always been restless. Restless. As if ambition were a character flaw. Emma didn't look at me. Not directly. But she smiled just barely, and it chilled more than a slap. The papers were already being drawn up. An NDA. A buyout of my share at 1/3 its value. Silence in exchange for erasure. When I returned to the office to collect my things, the nameplate on the door had already changed. Emma Quinn, Vice President. I paused at the threshold. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there and felt my own blood go cold. And then, Robert passed behind me, rested a hand briefly on her shoulder, and said, "You should have been my son." That moment became my eulogy. They didn't need a casket or a gravestone or a tearful speech. It was a funeral without a body. And I was buried in the silence of the conference room, sealed shut by signatures and lineage. When I walked out that afternoon, I left everything: title, income, family, purpose. But not my name. I wandered for a time, Berlin, then Seoul, then Singapore. My passport filled my pockets emptied. There were days I didn't eat, nights I slept under neon signs. I should have vanished. Instead, someone found me. He never gave a last name, just a card. Gold letters, stark design. You don't seem broken. Just misplaced. That meeting lit a fuse. I died that day. But death can be liberating. You don't need to be seen to be powerful, just strategic. The dining room of the club was carved in shadow and mahogany, a sanctuary for the unspoken elite. No sign out front, no menu on the table, just the weight of presence and legacy. I'd grown used to places like this where status whispered rather than shouted. Charles sat across from me, poised in his usual stillness. His eyes, narrow and unreadable, tracked the swirl of his tea, but rarely rose to meet mine unless necessary. That was his gift: stillness, mistaken for passivity. A man who had built an empire from silence. "It's done," I said, slicing a piece of duck confit and setting the knife down with care. "The final proxy transfer went through this morning. Arcturus now holds majority stake in Virex Tech." Charles nodded once. "Good. You waited long enough. 3 years, to be exact. 3 years of shell companies, silent partnerships, proxy agents, offshore structuring. We had threaded the needle through every regulatory blind spot until Arcturus Holdings wasn't just a name, it was a net stretched invisibly across entire industries. Few even knew who sat at the center of the web. But I did. Charles sipped his tea. They'll learn soon enough. I paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. There's one piece left. The family. Your revenge, he said. Not as judgment, but fact. Closure, I corrected, though we both knew better. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small box, mahogany velvet lined. Inside, the stellar Genesis rested like it belonged on a throne. Black titanium. Manual movement. The tourbillon shimmered like a heartbeat beneath glass. The crown, he said. I slipped it on, rolling my wrist once, letting the dial catch the low light. It was elegance without vanity, the kind of peace that whispered class to those who knew and stayed silent to those who didn't. I've always admired your restraint, Charles said. You built everything in the shadows. No name on the buildings, no interviews. You own more than your father ever dreamed of, and yet they still think you're gone. That's the point, I said. He studied me a long moment. You have the throne. Now it's time to reclaim your name. I looked away toward the tall windows and the rain-slicked skyline beyond. Power didn't need to announce itself, it just needed to wait. My phone buzzed. A text from Lucas. They're preparing the guest list. Mom says your seat will be near Emma. Of course she did. I typed back perfect. Lucas had always been quiet, but he saw more than people assumed. I'd need him soon. He just didn't know how yet. Charles stood finishing his tea. Be deliberate. Don't let emotion steer the next move. I won't. We shook hands, firm and brief. No goodbyes. Outside, my driver waited, curbside engine running. The black sedan glided through the streets toward LaGuardia as the sky cracked open with rain. In the lounge, I declined champagne, choosing instead a glass of still water. I sat by the window watching a jet lift into the fog, wondering if they ever glanced down and saw the tiny lives they left behind. When my flight was called, I moved without rush. The ticket was booked under a shell identity. Caleb Quinn didn't exist on the manifest. Not yet. I stepped onto the plane, slipped into my seat, and tugged my sleeve just far enough for the watch to gleam. Caleb boards the plane to Napa wearing an elegant black watch under his sleeve. Every brick remembers what it heard. The tires whispered against the gravel as the car curved up the long, familiar driveway. Quinn Estate emerged through the vineyard haze like a memory half-rotted but still standing, stone and shadow and silence. It looked the same. That was the first lie. I stepped out of the car. The air smelled of oak-scorched soil and something I couldn't place, regret maybe. In front of the wide double doors stood Diana Quinn, her arms folded in that perfect hostess pose. Smile painted on like the vineyard's yearly labels, expensive designed and wholly unearned. Caleb, she said. My God, you look thin. Hello, Mother. Her embrace was brief, all silken claws. She kissed the air beside my cheek. Let's not dig up old ghosts on your first night. They tend to dig themselves up, I murmured. Behind her, Emma descended the front steps in heels that clicked like metronomes. Her blazer was tailored, her posture confident, but I saw at the half-second delay in her smile, the pulse in her throat. Caleb. Her voice was even. Didn't expect to see you before Thursday. I like to be early. For everything. Still love surprises, don't you? Her words lilted with false warmth. I turned to the staff. 2 butlers, 1 groundskeeper, the same faces from 5 years ago. Not one met my eyes. No one offered to take my bag. Inside the house was colder than I remembered. The scent of old wine lingered, blended with cedar and some unnamed varnish that coated every surface. My footsteps echoed slightly too long in the hall. This way, Diana gestured, leading me not to my old bedroom but to the West Wing guest room. A deliberate distance. Thought you might prefer the quiet, she said sweetly. Of course. Lucas appeared at the hallway's edge, hands tucked in his sweater pockets. He smiled, and this time it was real. Still wearing black, he asked. Like I never stopped mourning, I said. He chuckled softly, pulling me in for a quick hug. Good to have you back. It was the only genuine welcome I'd received. Uncle Robert, I asked. Still at the workshop. Said he's got deadlines. A convenient absence. He knew I was coming. Later I wandered the halls. The grandfather clock still chimed at the hour, though its face had dulled. My fingers trailed over the banister of the central staircase, worn smooth by decades of footsteps, most of them not mine. I paused at a half-open door. My old room. Inside, dust had claimed the corners, but everything was intact. My books, the vintage drafting board, a faded blueprint of a chronograph pinned to the wall. My childhood scrawls, once rejected sketches, now the seed of something greater. I touched the edge of the drawing, remembering the night I'd shown it to Robert. He hadn't even looked up from his magnifier. You'll never be a watchmaker, he had said. I closed the door slowly. Downstairs, laughter floated from the sitting room, Emma and Diana probably reviewing the Thanksgiving guest list. I'd be listed as Caleb Quinn, returning from consulting abroad. A polite fiction. Polished shame. As I turned back toward the guest room, I nearly collided with Grace Quinn in the hall. She was older, thinner, wrapped in a cardigan 3 sizes too large. She didn't speak much, hadn't in years. But her eyes missed nothing. She walked past without pause, then leaned in just enough to whisper, "You've grown sharper eyes." Then she was gone. I stood there a moment, the words reverberating like a tuning fork. In my room, the air felt heavier. I placed the watch case on the nightstand. The lock on the door clicked behind me. Let them wonder. Let them remember what silence used to mean. Caleb smirks, locking his door. Let's begin. They lifted their glasses to her. I drank to their blindness. The dining room was cathedral-like in its grandeur. Golden chandeliers dripped with crystal, and the table stretched longer than memory. Gleaming silverware rested beside bone-white china, while the centerpiece, an extravagant arrangement of seasonal foliage and candles, cast flickers of light across expectant faces. Emma sat near the head of the table, radiant in a fitted navy dress, her lips painted a triumphant shade of red. The chair beside her, once mine, remained conspicuously empty until I was ushered to a seat 2 places down. A quiet demotion. Diana tapped her glass with a dessert fork. Before we carve into this beautiful turkey chef's best yet, I'd like to propose a toast to someone truly exceptional. The table leaned forward as if on cue. To Emma, Diana beamed. Our very own star, now a senior partner in training at LNA Global, one of the youngest to ever be considered for that track. Glasses lifted like a synchronized ritual. Lucas raised his half-heartedly, eyes shifting toward me. Grace didn't move, simply folded her hands. To Emma, they chorused. I took a sip, not to the toast, but to the performance. Emma stood gracefully, brushing an imaginary wrinkle from her dress. I'm honored, she began. This firm has global reach, high-stakes clients, and the chance to truly shape the legal world. I'll be working on a landmark merger, confidential of course, but let's just say it'll make headlines by the end of the fiscal quarter. A few obligatory gasps circled the table. Diana clapped. She's brilliant, isn't she? A prodigy, murmured one of the distant uncles. Emma scanned the room, gaze pausing for effect. I do wish more people knew what it was like to actually build something meaningful, she said, feigning humility. Lucas stiffened beside me. Grace raised one brow. Emma turned slightly toward my end of the table. But we all find our paths. Some take detours. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I said nothing. Diana chimed in. Yes. Well, not everyone's cut out for the family business. Or any business. Someone chuckled. Robert entered at that moment, his presence pulling gravity. He took his seat, wordlessly nodding at Emma. When his eyes landed on me, there was the briefest flicker acknowledgement not welcome. "Glad you could join," he said dryly. "Been off the grid, haven't you?" "Something like that," I replied, taking another sip. The dinner resumed in curated civility. Clinking cutlery muted conversation, small explosions of laughter all orchestrated around Emma. She relished in the center stage, navigating questions, steering anecdotes, reveling in the spotlight. Then came the dig. Emma twirled her wineglass thoughtfully. "At least some of us," she said sweetly, "are doing something with our lives." It landed like glass cracking beneath silk. No one laughed. I reached for my glass again, but this time my sleeve shifted slightly. Just enough. The candlelight caught the edge of the timepiece beneath sleek black polished metal with hand-lathed intricacies, the kind of watch only a master could recognize. And Robert, seated directly opposite, did. His fork paused mid-air. Lucas blinked. Even Emma's expression twitched. Caleb adjusts his cuff slightly, revealing a sliver of a 1.5mm watch. Eyes flicker. To expose the truth, I had to borrow shadows. Lucas's guest room was quieter than the rest of the estate, tucked behind the east wing like a forgotten confession. The wallpaper, peeling slightly at the corners, still bore the same pale blue hue from our childhood. Outside, the vineyard slept beneath a curtain of fog. Inside, the lamp cast a soft glow over stacks of folders spread between us like contraband. Lucas sat cross-legged on the floor, laptop open, his brow furrowed. He was never meant for confrontation, but there was something simmering behind his silence tonight. "She thinks I'm still just the shy cousin," he muttered, eyes scanning the screen. "But she's careless when people underestimate her." He was right. Emma had always assumed control came from volume, but Lucas had a different kind, slow-burning, precise. And tonight, his quiet was an ally. I slid a folder toward him. "These are public filings from LNA's pre-IPO restructuring. Pay attention to Schedule D." He flipped it open. "This clause, accelerated approval contingent on third-party guarantee, is vague." Deliberately so, I said. She used legal subtext to fast-track partnerships. No internal review. It's how she landed the merger. Lucas narrowed his eyes. "That's grounds for regulatory red flags. SEC would shred this." "Exactly," I said. "And Arcturus has been acquiring voting shares quietly. Once the IPO hits one wrong clause, and the whole valuation implodes." He leaned back, absorbing it. "You're not just here to humiliate her." "No," I said. "I'm here to take everything she took and build something stronger in its place." There was a long pause. Lucas finally looked up. "You said Arcturus was a holding company." "It is," I replied. "And I'm its founder. The board answers to me." His mouth opened, then closed. "If this works, she could lose everything. Then it's justice." Lucas looked away, swallowed hard. He wasn't built for retribution, but he understood grief. He'd watched what that family did to me. Maybe he'd felt some of it too. The door creaked. We both turned. Grace stood at the threshold in her shawl, eyes unreadable. She didn't step forward. She didn't speak. Just nodded once, as if granting permission. Then she vanished into the hallway. Lucas exhaled. "She knows." "She's always known." I turned back to the documents. A folder previously stacked beneath the others slid loose and fell open on the carpet. Inside was a single page on LNA letterhead, a signature scrawled at the bottom in aggressive black ink, "Emma Quinn." A folder drops open inside a confidential clause signed by Emma. He never let me touch it. Now it's mine, and more. The study still smelled like pipe tobacco and varnished oak even after all these years. Dust coated the spines of forgotten books, and the air was stiff with the weight of unspoken rules. I remembered every contour of this room, not because I loved it, but because I had memorized every place where my hands weren't allowed to go. Behind the bookshelf just above the floorboard, the panel clicked like an old secret when I pressed the baseboard in. The safe emerged slowly, whining in protest. My fingers hesitated before spinning the dial. Euro 4, 2790. My birthday. Of course he never changed it. For all his paranoia, sentimentality had always been his blind spot. Inside a drawer? Inside the drawer, a folder of sketches stiff with age. Mine. My original pencil drawings of the stellar genesis. My first real attempt at designing alongside him. I traced the lines with the back of my finger. The sharp bezel, the curved tourbillon bridge. I remembered how I had nervously shown him these at 17, how he scanned them in silence for a long, cruel minute before shoving them back at me. Derivative, he had snapped. You don't replicate brilliance. You inherit it. If you're worthy. But I hadn't stopped. In Switzerland, years later, I found a watchmaker who'd once worked for him. A quiet man named Hugo, who didn't flinch when I showed him the plans. He stared at them for a long time, then nodded. This, he said, is not a copy. This is a completion. We spent a year building it, sourcing parts, revising dimensions, correcting weight imbalances. I modified the lugs, refined the moon phase indicator. What he had mocked as immature, I reshaped into something enduring. The stellar genesis was no longer his unfinished pride. It was my silent rebellion ticking precisely at 18,000 vibrations per hour. Now it sat on my wrist, dark and gleaming under the lamplight. Grace entered without knocking. She moved like memory, soft and soundless. Still fits, she murmured, eyeing the watch. It always did, I said. She didn't touch it, just looked once more, then ran her fingers across the drawer's edge. He never saw it for what it was. Too busy looking in the mirror. She left before I could answer. But she was right. I reached into the safe again, deeper this time, to the lower compartment. There, wrapped in a velvet cloth, was its twin. Identical. Perfect. Untouched. I lifted the second watch carefully, holding it in both hands like something sacred. The engraving on the back plate was subtle, just a number, Chakrusau02. I held it a moment longer, pulse steady, and then placed it gently back into the cloth-lined box. My thumb hovered over the lid for a breath longer than it should have. He closes the box with the second watch. Not yet. He's not ready. The conference room at Arcturus Holdings was carved from glass and quiet threat. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across Manhattan's skyline, reflecting the icy grid of control I'd spent years perfecting. No family photos, no mahogany nostalgia. Just black leather chairs, tempered glass, and numbers that could crush legacies. The boardroom was silent except for the faint hum of the air system, climate-controlled like everything else in this building. My building. Charles appeared on the screen at the head of the table, arms folded behind his back, dark suit flawless. You've done well, he said, voice even. Faster than projected. They made it easy, I replied. The directors flanking me, 7 men and women, all vetted, all silent, sat straight as I flipped through the executive dossier. There it was, L&A Global. Once a fortress of untouchable prestige, now 51% of its voting shares were ours. Not stolen, bought, strategically, methodically clean. Final soft acquisition contract, said Yana, my legal strategist sliding the document toward me. I signed it without ceremony. One stroke. The moment didn't need drama. It already belonged to me. Charles nodded through the screen. Public announcement goes live 2 days after Thanksgiving. Let them have their dinner. Then take their plates. I closed the folder gently. I want the PR release delayed to the hour of the family's final toast. A flicker crossed Charles's eyes, approval. You're sure? Yes, I said. She'll toast her future, not knowing I'm the one writing it. No one questioned me. They didn't need to. In this room, doubt wasn't currency, it was liability. Emma had paraded around LNA's halls thinking she was climbing, all while Arcturus bought the steps beneath her. I leaned forward, clicked open my laptop, and pulled up the final merger agreement. It was all there, every clause, every hidden trigger. And at the bottom, the neat, pristine digital signature, Emma R. Quinn, Senior Legal Counsel, LNA Global. She had approved the merger paperwork 2 weeks ago, buried under a stack of acquisitions. The language had been tailored subtle. Buried clauses and shifting holding patterns masked the true ownership behind dummy shell firms. She didn't even know she'd signed her power away. I let my fingers hover over the upload and finalize button for a beat. He uploads the final merger agreement. Emma's signature is already on it. Sometimes the smallest movement is a thunderclap. The dining room glowed with curated elegance. Gold-edged china, deep burgundy napkins, crystal stemware catching the flicker of the fire. Every detail screamed curated tradition. Even the tension had been dressed for dinner. Emma sat at the head of the table basking in praise. The applause from the announcement of her newest title at LNA had barely faded when Diana lifted her glass again. To Emma, who reminds us all what true ambition looks like. A soft clink of crystal followed a chorus of polite admiration. I didn't join in. Emma beamed smug and unbothered. Well, she said with an effortless toss of her hair, at least one of us still knows how to work. Several chuckles rose, polite, hollow, but sharp enough to sting. I offered no retort. Just reached for my wine, and that's when it happened. As I lifted my glass, the cuff of my jacket slipped upward just slightly, revealing the watch. The glint of black titanium and sapphire beneath the candlelight was unmistakable. The reaction was instant. Robert, who had said nothing all evening, straightened abruptly. His eyes locked onto my wrist, then widened in a way I hadn't seen since I was a boy. It wasn't anger. It was recognition. His jaw clenched. His hand, once steady on the table, curled slowly into a fist. The air shifted. You could feel it the way a forest goes silent before a storm. Emma paused mid-sip, her eyes flickering between our father and me. Diana glanced at Robert, her smile faltering for the first time. Darling is something. But Robert didn't respond. I didn't look at anyone. I simply rested my wrist on the edge of the table, letting the watch catch the firelight again. A subtle act. A scalpel, not a sword. Silence stretched. Lucas leaned forward, brow creased. Grace sat utterly still, her lips parted ever so slightly, eyes studying me like a book she'd waited years to finish. I swirled my wine gently, then spoke. I had it commissioned in Geneva. One of two. Robert inhaled sharply. There it was, the moment. Years of exile, of silence, of invisibility. Detonated by a flick of fabric and a sentence. The stellar Genesis wasn't just a watch, it was his masterpiece. Or what was supposed to be. A legacy project he never finished, never allowed anyone to touch. Especially not me. And now, here it was, perfected real on my wrist. The room remained frozen, forks poised midair. Eyes darting between me and the gleam of vengeance on my wrist. Emma's voice finally broke the silence, soft, uneven, almost afraid. Her empire is built on a name. Mine is written beneath it. I didn't have to look behind me to know she was following. The click of her heels wasn't rushed. Emma never lost composure in front of an audience, but it was purposeful. The kind of cadence that belonged to someone who suddenly suspected a stage had been set without their consent. The study door shut softly behind us. "This isn't a game," Caleb, she said. Arms folded, eyes hard. I remained by the fireplace, letting the silence settle around us. The documents on the mahogany desk were already spread out. Neat. Intentional. "You've been playing chess against ghosts," she continued, "buying stock in my firm, whispering things to Lucas. You're not as clever as you think." I turned slowly. Emma, sit. She didn't. Suit yourself. I picked up the first document and handed it to her. A shareholder ledger. Nothing overt until you noticed who now held the majority voting bloc. She scanned it and her brow furrowed. Arcturus Holdings. A pause. I've heard of them, some holding company, private capital. Nothing to do with LNA. I placed another sheet beside her. Your signature. On the merger paperwork. From last quarter. She didn't take it. Lucas stepped forward, quiet until now. You approved it yourself. The language was buried under the acquisition summaries. Standard review. She turned to him. You knew Lucas didn't blink. I read everything. Emma's mouth opened, but no words came. I placed the final folder on top, sleek, embossed final. This is what you've been working so hard for, Emma. Late nights, long weekends, landmark deals. I tapped the corner. You did it all with my pen. Her fingers trembled as they hovered over the contract. You're Arcturus. I looked her squarely in the eye, my voice level. You were so busy climbing, you never looked who built the ladder. Emma sat down hard. Her hand drifted from the contract to her lap, stunned silence swallowing the usual poise. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. This wasn't triumph, not yet. This was exposure. I slid a slim black folder toward her across the desk. This is just Act 1. Justice doesn't knock. It enters with a key only silence owns. The room was designed for dignity, dark walnut paneling, thick velvet curtains that dulled the morning sun, and a long table that had seated countless Quinn family summits over the years. But none like this. Not today. At 10:59 a.m. they filed in. Diana first, her perfume arriving before her. Then Emma, posture brittle. Lucas followed, silent as shadow. Grace walked with slow intention, a small leather notebook tucked under her arm. And finally, Robert, stoic, unreadable, his cane clicking once against the threshold before he took his seat at the head. I stood at the other end. No one spoke. On the wall behind me, the large screen blinked to life as I tapped the remote in my hand. First slide, the Arcturus LNA merger documents. Simple, clean damning. Emma flinched. Diana's smile froze in place. I appreciate you all coming. I began, voice calm even. I wanted clarity. Not in the abstract, not whispered between corridors or wrapped in pleasantries, but here, in full view. I advanced to the next slide, Emma's signature, time-stamped contract ID encoded. She signed this, I said 3 months ago. She authorized the absorption of LNA Global into Arcturus Holdings. Emma's voice cracked through the silence. I didn't, Caleb. I didn't know what was buried in the terms. That's not. You didn't read? I corrected. Lucas stepped forward, a folder in hand. Clause 13.2. He read aloud. Transfer of operational ownership to parent entity, effective upon majority stock acquisition. Signature by legal counsel constitutes full consent. He laid the document down in front of Robert. Diana leaned in, squinting lips, pursed like she could will the fine print into meaning something different. Emma's eyes darted across the table. He's manipulating this. Twisting everything. No, I said, turning to face her directly. I'm revealing it. The screen flashed again. Email logs, internal correspondence, chain approvals routed through LNA's own legal system. Every breadcrumb she'd left in her haste to ascend, every oversight now laid bare. I stepped around the table, slow, deliberate. Arcturus Holdings, I said softly, is no longer a rumor. It's a fact. And I, as of last quarter, am its acting CEO. Silence. Grace closed her notebook gently. Truth doesn't always shout, she murmured barely above a whisper. But when it stands, the room leans. Emma slammed her hands down on the table. You tricked me? No, I said, without flinching. I trusted your arrogance. The room inhaled collectively like lungs unprepared for cold air. Diana narrowed her eyes, assessing angles, searching for a loophole that wasn't there. Robert, who'd remained still, suddenly shifted. His chair creaked as he stood cane forgotten beside him. His face, usually unreadable, wore something new, uncertainty. He looked directly at me. I need to know the rest. All of it. A name isn't legacy. It's debt, waiting to be paid. The vineyard behind the house hadn't changed. Evening sun spilled across the rows like spilled honey, warm and slow. I walked between the vines, letting the silence wrap itself around my shoulders. The air smelled of soil and smoke, as if the ground still remembered the seasons of burning and planting. Robert was already there, standing at the crest of the path near the stone bench, his figure sharp against the horizon. He didn't turn when I approached. "Your mother tells me you're the reason the boardroom turned into a courtroom," he said after a long pause. "I prefer truth over ceremony." His hands were behind his back, clasped tight. Emma's shaken, Diana's furious. Grace is unreadable as always. I said nothing. Robert turned to face me fully. His eyes scanned my face not with the usual disappointment but with something quieter, older. "The watch," he said finally. "It's yours." "No," I replied. "It was always both of ours. You just didn't want to admit it." I pulled a worn sketch from my coat pocket. He recognized it immediately. The early design slim case dual complication, the moon phase at 6 o'clock. My lines curved where his had been rigid. Where he had sought symmetry, I had sought soul. "I offered this to you once," I said. "You threw it into the fire." "I remember." I waited for more, an apology, a concession. But none came. Instead, Robert stepped closer, taking the sketch like it weighed more than paper. "Why finish it?" he asked quietly. "Why not let it die like I let you?" The words didn't sting the way they might have years ago. Now they settled like dust on old wood. "Because it still carried your lines," I said. "I only straightened them." He sat on the stone bench slower than I remembered. His hands trembled slightly, the paper still gripped too tightly. "You built something," he said after a while. "Not just a watch? A name." "No," I said. "I refined one." Robert looked up sharply. "You could have erased me." "I could have," I agreed. "But then I would have lost the only part of you that ever mattered." The silence between us thickened, not hostile but uncomfortable in its honesty. For years we'd danced around each other in the shadows of pride and principle. Now the light exposed the cracks. He looked away, his voice nearly a whisper. "You made one for me too, didn't you?" I said nothing. I reached into my coat and pulled out the black box, slim, matte, precise. I placed it on the stone bench beside him. Then I turned and walked away. When masks fall, they make no sound, but everyone feels it. The room smelled of polish and pride. Dark wood panels lined the walls of the Quinn and Sons Tradition Hall. Brass plaques gleamed under curated lights listing every patriarch of the house, their names, their years, their accomplishments, in neatly etched serif font. Legacy framed and boxed, nothing about betrayal, manipulation, or rewritten futures. Emma stood at the center, arms folded, her posture defiant, but something in her shoulders had slouched just enough for someone like me to notice. Lucas was already by the side wall, quiet, unreadable. Diana lingered near the fireplace, pale behind her usual poise. Grace, uninvited but unafraid, stepped toward the center with the same deliberate calm she always wielded like a scalpel. I didn't need to say a word. The room had already received my statement, an internal memo distributed only moments ago, hitting inboxes and board feeds at once. It wasn't dramatic, just precise. Emma Quinn was officially suspended pending internal review. The parent company, Arcturus Holdings, had requested full legal and fiduciary audits of LNA Global. Emma's eyes flicked to me when she read the memo on her phone, then to Lucas, then oddly, to her mother. Diana looked away. "I suppose you think this makes you noble?" Emma said sharply. After hiding in the shadows now, you want a parade? I didn't respond. I didn't have to. Grace stepped forward. In her hands, a rolled yellowing document. I was asked to store this, she said, voice steady. Years ago. It was a joint draft. Robert wanted it revised, but it was never destroyed. She let it fall open on the old oak table. The script was faint but clear. The original succession plan for Quinn and Sons, naming both Caleb and Emma. Equal heirs. Equal weight. Emma stepped closer and stared. Her eyes narrowed. This is fake. It's not, Grace said softly. And you know it. Emma looked to Diana. Tell them it's not real. Tell them this was never signed. Diana hesitated, mouth opening, but no sound came. Her lips closed again. Her chin dropped a fraction. Her silence said everything. I did what I had to do, Diana finally whispered, but no one was listening. Emma's voice cracked. So you buried it. Just like you buried him. Grace didn't flinch. You stole a crown that never fit your head. The words echoed across the room like breaking glass. Emma turned stiff. Her heels tapped against the marble as she walked out, not rushed, but no longer proud. No one followed. No one called her name. Even Diana didn't move. She passed the wall of names on her way out. She didn't look at them, and for the first time the weight of her silence was heavier than her presence. She left the room. Everyone watched. No one stopped her. Revenge is hollow. Restoration is not. The sun was dipping behind the vines, washing the estate in a golden hue that softened even the harshest edges of its architecture. The stone walkway beneath my feet still carried the warmth of the day, radiating upward as I stood at the edge of the driveway for the last time. Lucas waited beside me, hands in his coat pockets. Nervous in that subtle way he had, like a violin string just shy of snapping. His eyes darted to the house, then back to me. I don't understand, he said quietly. Why leave now? You won. I shook my head. This place needed a reckoning, not a ruler. He said nothing, but the silence between us wasn't hollow. It was full of something unspoken. Understanding. Relief. Respect. From the upstairs balcony, a silhouette stood motionless. Robert. His figure framed by the stone pillars he'd built around himself in every sense. I didn't wave. Neither did he. We'd said all that mattered. I handed Lucas a slim folder. Inside, legal documentation. Transfer of operational control. Quinn and Sons would no longer be under my thumb if it ever truly was. I'm not giving you the company, I said. I'm returning it. To someone who might rebuild it without the weight of resentment. Lucas opened the folder, eyes scanning briefly, then looking up in surprise. This gives me full authority. It gives you a choice. From behind, soft footsteps approached. Grace emerged from the garden path, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, her hands clasping a small velvet-covered box. I nodded. Is he still on the balcony? She didn't need to look. He hasn't moved. I took the box from her, turned it over in my palm once, then handed it back. Give this to him. She arched an eyebrow. You sure he'll know what it means? Grace studied me a moment longer, then tucked the box into her pocket. You were never here to claim, she said. You were here to cleanse. I didn't reply. Some truths sit best without echo. She stepped back, letting the quiet settle between us like the dust of something just demolished. Not ruined, just dismantled brick by brick. My car pulled into the circle. I opened the door. Lucas took a step forward. Caleb. Don't ask me to stay, I said, voice steady. This house and we've both had enough of each other. He looked down, then back up and extended his hand. We shook, not just hands, but the weight between us. The years, the family name, the silent oath of those who rebuild what others destroy. As I slid into the back seat, I caught one last glimpse of the balcony. Still, he didn't move. I didn't expect him to. The car door shut. The engine hummed. Gravel shifted under the tires as we pulled away. I didn't look back. Behind me, Lucas walked inside, still holding the folder. But in his other hand, something else, a rolled blueprint left on his desk earlier that morning. My final mark tucked beneath the legal ink and family ash. He unrolled it on the long table, the same design that once started a war, now redrawn in peace. And there on the back, barely visible unless you knew where to look, was a single engraved line in my handwriting: not legacy, not vengeance, just balance. And with that, I disappeared into the amber light, finally lightened of the name I had once been told I didn't deserve. The velvet box sat like a small weight in the center of Robert Quinn's mahogany desk, unmoved for 6 days. He had passed it every morning, sometimes glancing at it with something between suspicion and avoidance. It wasn't until the 7th day that his fingers finally reached for the lid. The hinges made no sound. Inside, nestled in dark fabric, the watch gleamed. He blinked once, then leaned forward. On the back of the polished case, engraved in a hand he knew intimately even now, were the words, "To the man who taught me precision and pain." Caleb. Robert stared at the inscription for a long time. His fingers trembled as they reached for the timepiece, not to wear it, but to feel the weight of it in his palm. He did not speak. For once, there was nothing to say. Across town, Emma stood at the far end of the office corridor, clutching a manila folder. Her stilettos made no sound against the freshly waxed floor. She was dressed in gray now, no longer the bright blues and bold reds of the rising star at LNA Global. The receptionist didn't stand when she passed. She was no longer the kind of person people stood for. She reached her cubicle, opened the folder, and typed quietly, eyes avoiding the corner office that used to be hers. Upstairs, Lucas adjusted his new nameplate, Interim Director Quinn and Sons. He had placed Caleb's design on the drafting table earlier that morning, a prototype inspired by the stellar Genesis, but imbued with softer lines, warmer curvature. Not a redesign, an homage. Beside it, a note card in Caleb's handwriting: "Balance is beauty measured in seconds." And somewhere over the Atlantic, I leaned back in my seat, watching the clouds unfurl like silent witnesses outside the plane window. You can't fix the past, but you can end it properly. I had given back the legacy, not as a surrender, but as a closing of a wound. For years, I'd carried the burden of being cast out of building power in silence. But now I was light. Lighter than I'd ever been. My name no longer had to echo in boardrooms or corridors to mean something. And the watch on my wrist ticked not as a reminder of revenge, but of choice. The quiet kind. The kind that doesn't shout, but lasts. Back in Napa, Robert stood before the mirror in his study. He lifted the watch from its box and with surprising steadiness clasped it onto his wrist. The fit was exact. A knock at the door. Then silence. He didn't answer. Later that day, as he stepped outside to the courtyard, a young journalist intercepted him with a hopeful mic and a notepad. "Mr. Quinn," she asked gently, "there's been talk about the watch. Can you confirm if it's a prototype or—" He paused, looked at her, then said nothing. Instead, he placed his hand over the watch flat against his chest and walked away. The metal caught the light just briefly, and then it disappeared beneath the fold of his coat. Even silence holds weight, especially when it's earned through years of betrayal, loss, and quiet resolve. Caleb didn't roar into victory. He walked out with dignity, leaving behind a legacy reclaimed, not stolen. Justice, after all, doesn't always wear robes or bang gavels. It sometimes comes in the form of a quiet man, returning what was taken and taking back what was denied. Like the final chord of a long-forgotten melody, justice may arrive late, but it resonates powerfully once it's heard. When injustice is met with unwavering courage, the final verdict can echo through a lifetime. Perhaps standing up today means you'll never again have to bow to injustice tomorrow. Like, share, and subscribe if this story moved you, and leave a comment 1 if you felt the justice, 2 if you wanted more.